Episode 8 of My Adventures with Superman is undoubtedly the strongest in this series so far. The story zeroes in on the burden that comes with having Superman's power, and out of that story we get an incredibly layered episode that gives Clark so much depth while also raising the stakes. I love how this show has handled Superman finding out his powers as he grows, and the introduction of super hearing in this episode is without a doubt my favorite. This is arguably Superman's most frightening power if you really think about it. I love how Man of Steel dealt with Clark trying to deal with his heightened senses, and I also love how they've approached it here by really showing the pressure that this kind of power would put on someone like Clark. He innately has to save everyone, and as much as he tries, it really wears him down. And this show balances the drama of it all with some genuinely charming comedy too.
I can hear everyone. And Jimmy? They have problems.
My fear at the beginning of this show was that it would be too lighthearted, which is obviously fine, but I love it when Superman stories actually delve into the drama that comes with having all that power while also dealing with a cynical, distrustful world. Superman's story is an immigrant story, and if you're going to tell a modern-day immigrant story, it would be highly disingenuous to ignore the unjust rhetoric that is directed at them.
Superman's dangerous. He should go back to where he came from.
And it's just as important to show how this rhetoric alienates them. This episode handled all of that brilliantly. The whole episode is Clark just trying his best to do the right thing, but despite that, he still gets looked at as if he's a monster from the people he saves, and he's made to feel different by people he's close to. The whole episode did such a fantastic job of unpacking the burden of responsibility that Superman has on his shoulders, and choosing to do this through his super hearing powers was a really intelligent move. We finally get to see Vicki Vale after learning of her existence in episode 1, and she plays a very vital role in this episode. Design-wise, they've ditched the red hair, which at a glance makes her look like Lois Lane from another universe, and I think that's deliberate. In the beginning of the series, Lois Lane was very much like Vicki Vale in her drive and ambition. We saw that she was willing to do whatever it takes to get the story she wanted, and before she knew who Superman was, she assumed, like Vicki, that Superman wasn't to be trusted. If she hadn't known Superman personally, who's to say that she wouldn't have gone down the same path as the journalist she admires? It was really interesting seeing this dark reflection of Lois. But my favorite aspect of the Vicki Vale subplot was the reappearance of Lex Luthor. Well, they're still only referring to him as Alex, but listen to him speak and tell me it's not the most Lex Luthor-y thing you've heard.
He's not normal like you or me. Anything's possible. And what happens when he decides that having powers means he doesn't have to follow our laws anymore? If he really wanted to hurt us, what could we do about it?
If this is indeed Lex Luthor and not a massive red herring, I really love what they've done with his design and character. Design-wise and character-wise, he reminds me a lot of Lex Luthor from Superman Birthright. Birthright was also the comic book that Zack Snyder seemingly pulled from for Jesse Eisenberg's Luthor. People who aren't familiar with Birthright tend to scoff at any Lex Luthor who is portrayed like that because he isn't bald and traditionally threatening like he is in more popular media. But I quite like it when Lex Luthor is depicted as physically scrawny, placing more emphasis on his intellect. Birthright's Luthor is young and immature, with a large ego and a chip on his shoulder. He's slightly unhinged, calling back to his mad scientist origins. And most importantly, he has long and messy red hair. There have been so many canon interpretations of Lex Luthor that there are so many paths to take with the character, and I personally love the path they've chosen with this Lex. It's also really cool that throughout the first season, we are basically seeing his origin story unfold amidst Superman's rise to fame. He starts off as an underling, as a scientist who doesn't get the recognition he feels he deserves, and he sees his livelihood destroyed by Superman. It's believable, and so far it's working very well for me. Lex Luthor is Superman's most iconic villain, so I'm thankful that in a show where everything else is moving at a breakneck pace, they decided to really take their time with fleshing out his character. We get a lot more of General Lane in this episode. At least that's what we're all calling him until they confirm it for sure. It was interesting to see how Lois reacted whenever Clark brought up the General.
Right now, I need to find the General before...
Well, maybe you shouldn't. At least not right now.
She seemed very quick to try and discourage Clark from confronting him, which to me is quite telling. You really have to feel sorry for Lois. She, much like Clark, is trying her best to navigate a very unique situation. Her heart is in the right place, but she's going to have some really difficult hurdles to overcome in the next couple of episodes. The action at the end of the episode was very well done. It was visceral and anxiety-inducing, knowing that Superman was up against a group of villains hell-bent on taking him down, and knowing that he was more than likely going to lose to them. Not only because he was outnumbered, but also because he was severely sleep-deprived and mentally beaten down as well. It was brutal, but as tough as it was to watch, it was very engaging. While it's really fun to see Superman saving cats out of trees and being the perfect superhero at all times, it's also just not viable, and this episode does a great job of presenting why that is. There was this fantastic scene in episode 2 where after fighting Livewire, Superman cleans up the mess that he inadvertently caused. Contrast that with the scene in this episode where he inadvertently causes a mess. He's tired and upset. He tried his best to help, but the people around him were unfairly judging him. Understandably, he flies off without cleaning up any of the mess. Superman can't be perfect at all times, and I'm so glad this show is highlighting this. Having that contrast and finding the right balance between light and dark is very important to have in Superman stories, and having Superman break through that darkness and show the world his light makes his wins hit so much harder. This show is doing such a good job with Superman, and it just makes me so happy. I cannot wait to see how they stick the landing in the final episodes. I'm reviewing every episode of my adventures with Superman, as well as making other videos like this Across the Spider-Verse theory of mine that I promise you is worth a watch. So please feel free to subscribe and check out my other videos.